Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm so glad that you've chosen to join us tonight for our Wednesday night Bible study. If this is your first time joining us, we're going through the book of James. We're going to be in James chapter 5 tonight, and we are just excited to get into God's Word. It's such a treat to be able to see this really practical, meaningful advice for us come out of the Bible. We're going to just jump right on in with James chapter 5. Starting in verse 1, says, "Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted, and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in these last days. Look, the wages you have failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you." So James has given out a whole bunch of really practical advice. He's talked about how trials are used to build us up. He's talked about how we need to control our tongues. He's talked about all sorts of things. And here he's gonna focus in on the wealthy. Because the wealthy people have a particular struggle that a lot of other people don't have. Jesus talks about it, right? Doesn't he? He says it's easier for a camel to fit through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. There's a particular set of struggles that they really have to deal with that we as much, I say we, I don't consider myself wealthy, but in the grand scheme of the world, I'm in the top 1% of the world. Even as a poor preacher, I'm in the top 1% of the world. The wealthy have a responsibility to the people who are trusting them. It says, let's look at some of these points. He says, "Your gold and silver have corroded and testify against you." What you see here is this image of just a whole bunch of precious metals, assets that are put in a dark, wet place and just left there to do nothing. It reminds me of the parable of the talents, right? So Jesus tells this parable of this wealthy man who is leaving, and he is entrusting his servants, one with 1 talent, one with 2 talents, one with 5 talents. And the guy who gets 1 talent, he takes it and he hides it. He doesn't do anything with it. He says, "I have what you gave me here, you can have it back." He doesn't do anything with it. Here, I think we have the same kind of mentality. These rich people that James is condemning are hoarding their wealth, not using it. They are taking their wealth and using it for their own good and not for the good of others. And in fact, they're not just not using it for the good of others. They are cheating, it says. They are cheating others out of what they are rightfully owed. Look back on it. It says, the wages that you failed to pay are crying out against you, right? And so what I think James is trying to say here is that your business practices and your faith are not isolated. This past week, I went to Oklahoma Christian University for my undergrad and graduate, and Stafford North had been a professor there since 1952, and he passed away. And I will always remember one of his sermons that he gave during chapel down there. He came up to the podium and just said, "submarines," and then he left. That was it. We were dismissed. And then the next day, he came in and explained how a lot of people want to think about their life as a submarine, where you can have compartments that can lock off so that water can't flow from one area to another. We have this compartment where we have school. We have this compartment where we have work. We have this compartment where we have our sexual ethic. We have this compartment where we have all sorts of different compartments. And he says, but that's not how you are. Everything flows into each other. That's how human beings really are. Everything affects everything else. And so James is laying into some of these Christians who think that their business practices are that kind of compartment. They can treat people how they want to in business because it's just business. You ever heard that before? Oh, it's just business. But no, people don't cease to be people just because you're in business with them. And the command to love your neighbor and to care for the stranger does not end where our businesses start. And so I think for today's America, James would have a lot to say. He would say, hey, you know that big old TV that you bought yourself? When's the last time you invited somebody to come watch something with you? You know that swimming pool that you put in your backyard? When's the last time you invited people to come and use that? I don't think James is anything against rich people being rich. I think what he has against these rich people is their selfishness in their wealth. And so he's calling us all. I think everybody in America is wealthy compared to third world countries. Even if you're below the poverty line here, you're still living on more than $1 a day, which is what the majority of the world lives on. He's calling us to be open and to be generous with the people around us. I wish there was nobody on the poverty level, and we as a church, we can do a lot to help with that. One of the things I'm really proud of that we do is our benevolence work, where we've been, especially in this hard time, we've been blessed with a lot, and so we're trying to give a lot. And so take that as an example into your life. Start looking for ways that you can give back, because the way that you conduct yourself financially is not unrelated to your faith. He goes on in verse 7. Be patient then, brothers and sisters, until the Lord's coming. See how the farmer waits for the land to yield its valuable crop, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. You too be patient and stand firm, because the Lord's coming is near. Don't grumble against one another, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. This is a word from God for me today. I think James wrote these words for me, because right now in this season of uncertainty, of waiting for all of this mess to be over, waiting for a vaccine, I can get impatient. I don't know about you, but there's a much greater blessing that's coming. He says, be patient until the Lord's coming. You know, this world is a broken place. You can see that all over. You can see the brokenness of this world pretty much anywhere you look. And if you are in tune with the heart of God, when you look around and see the brokenness of this world, it should hurt. It should hurt your heart. And if it doesn't, I want you to pray to God and ask Him for discernment, to ask Him to open your eyes to see. And so James says, as we're sitting here waiting for God to act, we're like the dry land that's waiting for the rain. The farmer is at the mercy of the weather. We know that pretty well around here. We also know that the Lord is coming. In times where our patience is tested, whether it's with this COVID mess or whether it's with seasons in our life that we wish were going a little differently or whatever, it's easy to get testy. It's easy to get down. It's easy to get grumpy. But I think God calls us to be faithful in these moments. And so in James chapter 5, he also talks about this warning. He says, the rain's coming. Wait for the rain. You're going to be filled up. What God is going to do, the glory that's coming with God, is not even worth comparing to what we have now. It's just in a whole nother league. And in verse 9 says, don't grumble against one another, or you will be judged. The judge is standing at the door. And so he says, look, I know that waiting for rain is a pain. I know that this time of transition, this time of of waiting on God is tough. But those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up on wings like eagles. It says, don't get testy with each other. You know, I remember when I was a kid, we'd be riding in the back seat of a car on a long trip, and after a while, we'd start bickering with one another, as kids do, and that's easy to fall into even as an adult in these situations where we're having to wait, especially if we're waiting in a season of our lives, waiting on God to do something, and we just see everybody else's seasons passing us by. We start to grumble at one another. We start to fight amidst one another. And James says, don't bother with that. The judge is coming. The rain is coming. Don't worry about what's going on with the rest of them. Verse 10. Brothers and sisters, as an example of patience in the face of suffering, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. You've heard of Job's perseverance and seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. And so, in that season of waiting, James wants us to consider the prophets. I'll tell you what, the prophet Jeremiah is the scariest example for me in my entire life, because the prophet Jeremiah was so faithful, so prolific, so on fire for the Lord, and nobody ever listened to him. And I think, man, how much faith did he have in God to just keep going when no one would listen to him? Think about Job. Think about the faith that he had to keep going when he lost everything. When his friends were telling him that he's the problem, when his wife was telling him to curse God and die. Think about the perseverance that takes. James is saying, look, I know that this world that we're living in is not perfect. It's not great. It's not the best. It's not going to be easy. He says, consider what God has done for the people who persevered. How he honored Job with more blessing than he had at the beginning once he came through all of the tribulation. I think what James is trying to tune us into is the character of God. You know, God is not one to just leave us where we are. He wants us to be full of his mercy and be changed by his compassion. And God is faithful to do that as we are faithful to follow him. That might not happen in this life. It may happen in the next one. But God has promised that we will see the fruit of what we've done. Verse 12. Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth, or by anything else. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned. So here James kind of quotes what Jesus said, right? Talks about your yes being yes and your no being no. And I think this is related to what he said before, right? So he talks about the rich people who are withholding things from their workers, who are not sharing what they earn, who are really in life for themselves. And he talks about the hard times that people are coming on and the patience that we are called to have through that. And then it's almost a pretty sudden jump. And he says, above all, it's a weird transition. He says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. What we're seeing here is, I think God is saying, James is saying that in all that we do, we need to honor God. In all that we do, we need to honor the Lord. And that includes being truthful. It includes being truthful to the workers who work for us. It includes being truthful to the people around us, testifying to the truth to the people around us. It includes waiting patiently on God because we made that commitment on that day, whether it was yesterday or 40 years ago. We made that commitment to let your yes be yes and your no be no. Be an honorable person. Verse 13. Is anyone among you in trouble? Let him pray. Is anyone happy? Let them sing songs of praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let them call the elders of the church to pray over them and anoint them with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer offered in faith will make the sick person well, and the Lord will raise them up. If they have sinned, they will be forgiven. Therefore, confess your sins to each other and pray for each other that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective. Elijah was a human being, even as we are. And he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced crops. And so there's a few things that James hits on here. And I think one of the first ones is something I think we need to hear more. We need to talk about more. The first one is that emotion is not bad. Sometimes we get this mistaken notion that whether it be in worship or in life that we need to be really intellectual people, we need to shut out emotion, we need to just be kind of stoic people. And that's not what James is saying. He's saying if you're in trouble, if you're having a hard time, pray. Let that come out. There's no need to bottle that up. If you're happy, sing songs of praise. Sometimes we throw around emotionalism as if it's an insult, as if, oh, well, that's just emotion. But God uses emotion. God has emotion. Have you noticed that? That things please God. Things make God angry. Things make God jealous. God has emotion. Emotion isn't bad. And so James says, if you are in a good place with your emotions, live and speak out of that. If you're in a bad place with your emotions, live and speak out of that too. Don't hide. We get this impression that we're supposed to hide our negativity as Christians, and I think we get the reason that some of that from things where Paul will say like, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice. But if you look at Job, if you look at the Psalms, you can see these people who are really hurting. They call out to God and say, God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from the words of my groaning? You have this lament where you confess that, God, I'm in a terrible place, but I know that you're still you, and I'm going to put my trust in you. That's where prayer comes in. We say, God, this is where I am, and I know you're good, but I don't get how those go together. That's a perfectly acceptable place to be, and it's also perfectly acceptable to just be elated, ecstatic, out of control, happy for God. Emotion is not bad. The second thing I think we see here in James 5 is that prayer is powerful. He says, if anyone's in trouble, let him pray. He says, if anybody's sick, let the elders come and anoint them with oil and pray over them. And I love that. It's something that I get to do in my day-to-day when there's serious illness that I hear about that somebody brings to me. I will not so much now because of COVID, but I'll usually go make a visit to those sicker people and pray with them. And prayer is powerful. Prayer is powerful. We skip down to verse 17. We can see the illustration that James uses, right? He says, if you're sick, if you're feeling down, have one of the elders come pray with you, and God will do something. It says it will raise you up. Notice it doesn't say it'll heal you, but God will do something. It says Elijah was a human being, even as we are, and he prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain. And then he prayed again, and it did. He says prayer is powerful. Elijah was just a guy. Elijah's this larger-than-life prophet, but he's just a guy. And you know who else is just a guy? I'm just a guy. You're just a guy. Or girl, I guess. You're just a person. You're just a person. But prayer is something that any person can use. And so prayer is powerful. And lastly, confession is good for the soul. Verse 16, it says, "Therefore confess your sins to each other and pray for each other that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person is powerful and effective." This is something we don't do well as human beings generally. We do not confess well. I would encourage each one of you to find somebody. If it has to be your spouse, it can be your spouse. If it has to be your parents, it can be your parents. Somebody that you can talk to and just say, I messed up. I've hurt somebody and I need to talk about it. Confession is good. And then also it says, confess to one another and pray for one another. We just don't do this very well. And there's a lot of reasons. One is a little bit of that non-emotion mask thing that we put up at church, right? We don't want people to know what's going on in our internal life. And so we pretend that everything is fine. And as long as we can pretend that everything is fine, we don't have to deal with it, right? But that's not what the Scripture is calling us to do. Confess to one another so that you can pray for one another and so that healing can take place. You can't begin to heal until you recognize that there's a problem. And so confession and prayer is really the first step in doing that. But I don't want to let you in. I don't want to let you see my issues, because then you might think that I'm a broken person. But the truth is, we're all broken. You're just like me, just like Elijah. And if we are faithful and we confess and are willing to be vulnerable, it says that God's going to do something there. And I believe that. Verse 19. My brothers and sisters, if one of you should wander from the truth and someone should bring that person back, remember this: whoever turns a sinner from the error of their way will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. And so this is a kind of a striking moment, because this has a little bit of I would say a contradiction with some other scripture, and I'll pull that up for you right now in Hebrews. Because we talk about in Hebrews chapter 10, Hebrews 10, starting in verse 26, it says, "For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins." And so the way that this is painted, it makes it sound like, well, if you wander from the truth after already knowing the truth, then you're just written off. There's no hope for you. And I don't think that's what Hebrews is doing, and I don't think that James thinks that's what Hebrews is doing, because he says, if one of you, so Christians, should wander and someone bring you back, whoever turns a sinner from error will save them from death. And so the question is, well, which is it? Well, I think what Hebrews is doing is a little different. I don't want to get too far into what Hebrews chapter 10 is doing there, but I do want to get into what James is doing here. So he says, in this place of vulnerability and confession, if you're willing to get into that mess, you're going to do some good. Because often what happens is when we get into that vulnerable place and we start being open to other people's vulnerability, we start seeing all kinds of mess. And that's uncomfortable. I don't like being in the middle of mess. And I'm sure you don't either. But this is where God calls us to be. He says, get in the mess. Try and guide these people who are struggling back to where they need to be, because it matters. It's easy to write somebody who's in the mess off. It's easy to write somebody who's in the grips of addiction off. It's easy to write somebody who is in the midst of sexual sin off. It is easy to write people who are liars off. It's easy to write it's easy to write people off based on what they've done. But what God says is, don't look at people based on what they've done. Look at people based on who they belong to. And I think if God saw how we write people off, he would say, how dare you? That's my child. Go after them. Reminds me of the parable of the sheep, right? Where the shepherd has 99 sheep who are safe on the hill, and one wanders away, and he leaves the 99 to go after the one because they matter. They matter. And what James is trying to say is, these people who wander away, they matter. They're vulnerable. They're scared. They don't know the truth. They've been taken in by a lie. And they need your help. And so he says, get after them. Not in like a harping way, but as the gentle shepherd goes and finds the sheep bleeding in the wilderness. Go to them. The book of James is filled with lots of wonderful practical advice. It's filled with just so many interesting bits. And I think this last chapter is one of the most interesting because it calls us to communal faithfulness. Right? It starts with the wealthy. It goes through and talks about our communal problem of this waiting for Jesus. We're waiting for our lives in whatever season we're in to move on to something better. It talks about how we need to confess to one another, pray for one another. When we're happy, we need to have space for that. When we're sad, we need to have space for that. We need to be able to be our authentic selves, be vulnerable, whether it be in our emotions or in our confessing of sin or in our relationship with one another. We need to drop the masks. And as we drop those masks, if we see somebody who has begun to wander off, who the truth has become too difficult to live in, we need to surround them and build them up and bring them home, because they can be brought home. And that one sheep matters, even if there's 99 safe in the fold. And that's the book of James. I am really glad that you guys have stuck through with me on this study. It's been wonderful for me. We're going to be having church here at the building at 10:30. Our Bible classes right now, we are scheduled to get back in-person Bible classes on August 19th and on August so our next Bible class here will be August 12th. And so I hope you've enjoyed this study. We're going to start a new study on our next one. But this is a wonderful thing. I'm very glad to be able to do this with y'all, but I'm also really looking forward to being back in person as well. All right, guys, let's pray. Father, we're just so grateful. We're grateful for your blessing, for your love and your provision. Father, I'd ask that you would guide the hearts and minds of each one who is tuned in today, that they would seek you in wherever they find themselves, that they would know the truth, that they would live a life that honors you. Father, I pray that we'd have the courage to be vulnerable, that we would confess to one another, that we would understand that our lives can't be compartmentalized, that we need to deal with the sin that's in our life, no matter what corner of our life we've pushed it into, and we need to be vulnerable to let people help us with that. We need to be in community. We need to be faithful. We need to understand that the most vulnerable around us, they are our responsibility, that we are our brother's keeper. Father, I'd ask that you would continue to work and move, and that by your Spirit, not only would this land be healed physically, but this land would be healed spiritually. We ask this all in Christ's name. Amen. Thanks, guys. See y'all later.